I'm Brian Kilmeade.
I'm Kennedy.
I'm Sean Duffy, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, February 17th, 2023. I'm Jessica Rosenthal. They say the air is clear and the village well water is safe, but Ohio residents who live near where a train derailed and where toxic chemicals were burned off are skeptical.
If you see black smoke, that's incomplete combustion. So some of this stuff was going into the air, not totally burned, and we don't know what that cloud contained.
I'm Chris Foster. Nikki Haley's running for president, saying mostly it's time for generational change. She's not the only Republican younger than Joe Biden or Donald Trump.
You can't run for the GOP nomination and not say why you're the one of the GOP field who is the best to take on whomever the Democrats have to offer. So she's going to have to start getting into policy and some tougher questions about Trump.
We're speaking with Fox News Sunday host Shannon Bream.
And I'm Tammy Bruce. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Residents who live in and around East Palestine, Ohio, remain worried about the effects of chemicals burned off in their town following a train derailment. The Norfolk Southern train derailed February 3rd. Officials removed and burned off the dangerous vinyl chloride chemical February 6th, fearing if they did not, the chemicals might explode. But the burn-off sent up a giant plume of black smoke, and residents like Lisa Marie Sopko could feel it.
We could feel our eyes burning, and, we could feel like our skin, our exposed skin, right, kind of burning. And so it was terrifying.
Governor Mike DeWine said Wednesday air monitoring, village well water testing show the area is safe. They told people, though, to hold off on drinking from private wells until testing was done on those. But residents remain suspicious. Jenna Giannos, who lives outside the previously evacuated area, started a Facebook group to help. And she started to see people who were told they could return home, not wanting to go home anymore.
We have chickens, foxes, fish, cats, dying. They were all near the area, but not necessarily in the evacuated area. We've had a lot of parts of the community come together to help get some of those larger animals outside of the area, but I don't think anybody knows what's far enough away.
That is on the minds of many who are in and around the evacuation zone. Should they stay or leave again?
Thursday was the worst day yet. This is the first time I've ever smelled it in my house.
Russell Murphy lives in East Palestine, Ohio, and spoke to us Thursday.
We have a wind change. It's coming straight north and coming right up the road in front of us, up by road, and you can smell it in the house. This is the first time for that. We had some folks that were very kind to bring us 500 gallons of water for the horses. That was they were from Erie, PA. They come down and brought water, so I was sticking around the house. As far as the odor and the headache, it's almost like as soon as you put a cough drop in your mouth, you get that rush of that menthol. It makes your tongue tingly. Your gums are tingly below your teeth, behind your lips. It's there was so much chemical, and there still is. And I think it's getting worse. I don't think it's getting any better.
Does that make you want to leave again? Sounds like you said you did leave. Do you want to leave again?
Today is very odd. Today has been an eye-opener. Yeah, I don't know what to do. And what's it going to do long term? What kind of environmental effects is this going to do? It's horrible.
Russell, just really quickly, what's your feeling right now? You're saying you're feeling a little bit better, that there seems to be some sort of official response here, at least to the testing of the water. Do you feel like the response has been sufficient? Do you feel like it was lagging for a while and now people are getting on top of it? And what's your sense of from your local officials all the way up to the feds?
I would say locally, it's a town of 4,700 people. And nor most towns of that size, we're just not equipped for something like this. I mean, you take a horror novel, rip a chapter out of it, throw it on the main street of East Palestine, and we're reading it and living it, because I think a lot of people are just, they're scared as hell. And as far as the chain of command goes up, Bill Johnson was at the town hall, our Ohio congressman, he was quick to hand out his card. The DCNR, the EPA, the Board of Health, the village of East Palestine, they were there, but there was no direction. You got there, But Norfolk Southern was nowhere to be found. They elected not to come. I think they ambushed us. You know, they didn't even zoom in on a big screen TV. They said they were scared for their safety, and they took their toys and left. And they're the Goliath that made the mess. And then for them to have the gall to not to show up, you know, it was just unbelievable.
Now, as for what caused this particular wreck, the NTSB says surveillance video from a residence showed a wheel bearing in the final stage of overheat failure on the train just before it derailed. Some employees of Norfolk Southern are questioning the weight distribution of the train and the length. Governor DeWine said this train wasn't categorized as even having hazardous materials on board. He said he wants Congress to look into that. Now there's a conversation, though, about a rule the Trump administration repealed that was going to require new braking systems on trains. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who had not spoken about the Ohio derailment, said Thursday he is constrained by legal issues when it comes to this new brake rule the Trump administration repealed.
In all my 39 years doing the studies and teaching and telling my guys about stuff and teaching it to them, I've never come across an incident where they actually blew up rail cars and dumped the chemicals into a pit to burn them off.
Sil Caggiano is a hazardous materials specialist and former battalion chief with the Youngstown, Ohio Fire Department.
To begin with, you were dumping vinyl chlorides and butyl acrylates into the waters there. And when you decided to burn it off, the vinyl chlorides turned into hydrogen chloride and phosgene. Now, phosgene was a World War I CG agent that they used. It was a choking agent. The Germans used it. You basically choke on your own body fluids. Terrible way to go, but not before you have the coughing, the tearing of the eyes, the rash of the skin from the acids. You know, it's just a horrible way to die. And hydrogen chloride is not much different. My concerns when they detonated the whole thing, other than being surprised, was that that back cloud in the fire service, if you see black smoke, that's incomplete combustion. So some of this stuff was going into the air, not totally burned, and we don't know what that cloud contained. And, you know, my biggest fears are dioxins, furans that may have been, caused from the incomplete combustions. And I'm looking at it and saying, you know, my goodness, we basically nuked the city. And the reason why we did this, I think, was to expedite the remediation of the problem and to get the rail lines open again.
Well, what about the idea that, this was the only option other than a possible explosion? I assume this is better to have burned it off than to have had an explosion, but were those really the only two options? It sounds like you said you're surprised. You said you've never seen any response quite like this to deal with a hazardous chemical situation. So do you feel like there were more options?
I personally do, yes. For the first due engine companies that were there, did what they were supposed to, from what I've been told. They put unmonitored master streams on these tankers to cool them down. And Norfolk Southern told them to pull them off because it wasn't going to have any effect on them. Subsequently, after they did that, one of the tankers started to heat up, which makes me kind of wonder. And to me, it just seemed to be a way to hurry up and expedite getting rid of the product. And, you think about it, if they put the fire out, if it didn't levy, now they have all these tanker cars with unmarketable product that have to be offloaded as hazmat and disposed of as hazmat. And hazmat is very expensive to dispose of. This way, it all got disposed of in a cloud that got spread out over God knows how far.
So the governor says this train wasn't labeled as having hazardous materials on board. Given your experience, it sounds like there was a relaxing of the rules or a changing of the rules that I think Governor DeWine was saying that because there were a certain number of cars that had hazardous materials in them and it wasn't, that many compared to the rest of the train, that's why it didn't get the label. Does that sound odd to you? You've been doing this a long time, and would you have assumed that at least those cars should have been labeled? I mean, he's saying that the state had no clue.
What he's referring to is the consist. The consist wasn't directly available, and I find that highly unusual because if you're requiring the local first responders to mitigate this, they have the right, and Sarah Title III gives them the right to know what the heck they're dealing with. And, I find that extremely arcane that you would ask somebody to mitigate something and you're not giving them full disclosure as to what the products are that they're dealing with. There should have been safety data sheets attached to the consist that spelled out the dangers of these chemicals and gave you the names of them. I just find that just totally, anti-productive. But it doesn't surprise me because these problems with the rail lines and the safety, they go back probably to, the Clinton administration. And it's been infrastructure issues, aging rail lines, aging rail cars. You've got a braking system on these cars that was developed after the Civil War. There are more technologically advanced braking systems that prevent cars from running into each other, the electronic brakes. Actually, the executive order to require the railroads to do that was signed in under Obama and subsequently under the Trump administration because they felt it wasn't cost effective, was signed out. So, cost effective, ask the people of, East Palestine how cost effective that is. It's very costly.
What would you then tell, because Transportation Secretary Buttigieg has come out and said, well, we're limited by the law because the Trump administration repealed this new braking system that was supposed to take effect. And he's saying, we're restricted in moving forward. So what would you tell then Congress or the Transportation Secretary now under this administration what they should be doing then if this is such a crucial issue and these newer brakes should be on these trains?
I would tell both sides of the aisles, this isn't a red issue or a blue issue. This is a people issue. And when you're dealing with people's lives, you have a great trust as an elected official to make sure what's going down the lines is safe, the people are safe, and if a problem happens, there is measures to help take care of it. What you're seeing in East Palestine is just a total breakdown of the government's ability to regulate the transportation of these chemicals. They have become almost owing and obliging to like Norfolk Southern and these other rail companies. Those people don't care. All they care about was getting their darn cars back on the tracks. You don't send people home and say, if you want your house tested, we'll be there testing your house. But within minutes of doing that, the trains are running again in East Palestine. I mean, that's just crazy.
You had another concern about that, right? With the contaminated soil being put back onto the area. And so is that a concern of yours too as a hazmat specialist, that the idea of these trains going through and disturbing the soil that's full of this contamination?
Well, not only that, they're disturbing the soil, but it rained. So guess what the vinyl chloride did in that soil? It leached down into the ground. And people have wells out there. You're potentially contaminating well fields. And it just seems like the whole response through this, it was a backup and a backup and a backup. And I don't think they told the people the truth from the get-go. And I can only reinforce that this cannot be allowed to continue to happen. East Palestine could be your town, could be my town, could be anybody's town. And people elect officials to protect them. They're not getting protected by allowing these rail industries to deregulate themselves and get away with this stuff. And these rules have to be strengthened. You have to approve the infrastructure. You have to hold these people's feet to the fire. They're making billions of dollars, and you see very little investment back into their infrastructures.
Sil Caggiano, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
This is Tammy Bruce with your Fox News commentary coming up.
Former President Trump has company in the Republican presidential race.
For a strong America, for a proud America, I am running for President of the United States of America.
Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley made her announcement this week in Charleston. She served as United Nations ambassador during the first 2 years of the Trump administration. Fox's Sean Hannity asked if there are any issues where she splits with the former president.
Where do you see, if you see, policy differences beyond what you mentioned, which are generational differences? What specific policy areas would you say part with Donald Trump?
What I am saying is I don't kick sideways. I'm kicking forward. Joe Biden is the president. He's the one I'm running against.
For now, she has some of the spotlight to herself.
She brings a lot of energy. Of course, she would be history making. And she's the first one willing to dip her toe in against the former president, Donald Trump, who she had said she wouldn't run if he did.
Shannon Bream is the host of Fox News Sunday.
She's got a lot of interesting buzz, but a lot of the deeper dive on her is, okay, what is her domestic policy? What is she going to do that will differentiate her from the rest of the field? Where does she break with the former president on policy after having served in his administration? She hasn't really gotten into a lot of those questions to answer those just yet. She will continue to say, this is about taking out Joe Biden as president of this country. I'm the one who can win against him if he runs for reelection. But she doesn't really want to talk about the GOP field, and she's going to have to, because I think that primary, we all know, is going to get very heated.
Yeah, I mean, I guess she just figures, why not get out there and have a short amount of time, at least, where people are only talking about me as far as challengers to Donald Trump. Now, like everybody else, she's talking around Trump at most. No one's saying his name like it's cursed or something. And nobody wants to be the first to go right at him. You don't want to draw his wrath. You don't want to draw his supporters' wrath. It may have to be a safety in numbers thing, where once more people are in, they just all try to pig pile. Mm-hmm. I mean, even then you can tick off his supporters and just make him more popular. But I don't know how else you do it. You got to go through him at some point.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And she does have kind of this open field at this point because there aren't other GOP folks. And we know there's a lot of chatter about, Tim Scott, Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, and many others out there. But for now, she's got the spotlight to herself. The former president announced last fall, and a lot of folks thought it was so early, it would get kind of lost in the holidays. He hasn't been doing a ton of events. He's starting to. So yeah, she's got a little bit of time where she can have the microphone and have this conversation. But I think she's going to have to answer those tough questions about what makes her different. You can't run for the GOP nomination and not say why you're the one of the GOP field who is the best to take on whomever the Democrats have to offer. So she's going to have to start getting into policy and some tougher questions about Trump.
Yeah, I mean, she can talk about how we need generational change, but then so can Tim Scott, so can Glenn Youngkin, so can
Ron DeSantis.
Yep. Yeah. So she's without another way she's talking about Trump without talking about Trump, and obviously talking about President Biden. She's calling for a competency test, however that whatever that means, for politicians over 75. She's clearly just trying to say, she's trying to forward her generational change thing. Mm-hmm. Is it valid or just discriminatory or what?
I think it does spotlight that if these two candidates from 2020 rematch, President Biden and former President Trump, it was her one way of taking a little bit of a swipe at Trump, because she did say, we have these guys running who are 80. Like, is that really what's the best thing for the country? Well, that's not just Biden. That does include Trump as well. So it is kind of the tiniest little glimmer of taking a bit of a swipe at him, but it does change that conversation. I think back about President Reagan saying, okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. I'm not going to hold your age and inexperience, your youth against you. So, a smart older candidate is going to be able to turn that to their advantage. But it is something that distinguishes her from the two we think are in for 24.
Yeah. Speaking of older, now no longer a candidate, Dianne Feinstein has announced her retirement after, I think, like 30 years in the Senate. It's going to be. Now, that's a lot of big-name Democrats with all about the same politics who are going to be clawing for that seat. How do they differentiate themselves?
That's a great question, too. I was just out in California for a couple of days, and there is some chatter about this race. I mean, when you've had the same senator for decades, there are questions because, listen, everybody who has ever thought of running for the Senate, that's a Democrat out there, is going to get into this thing because it's so rare that a seat opens up. It's very powerful and can, in California, keep you in the Senate for decades. So, the Adam Schiffs and the others who are talking about getting in, I think it's going to be a little bit like the Republican primary we saw in 2016, where you have like 17 people on stage trying to figure out who's going to be the best bet here. But this is their time to shoot their shot. It's the time that seat is going to be open. And I just expect it's going to be a very crowded field. And I would imagine it's going to pull progressively left. I don't think a moderate candidate is going to make it through the primary.
Yeah. Just back to the presidential stuff for a minute. If it's Trump Biden again, do you see a lane for an independent to have a big impact? Maybe not win, but draw. I mean, Ross Perot got, I think, 19% back in the day. I don't know who that could possibly be or who it might siphon votes off from. But if enough people are sick of the guys that are there and don't want to see a sequel to that, maybe somebody can bubble up.
Yeah, it's a real danger for both the candidates if those two get back in, because the polling shows us repeatedly, especially in recent weeks, that people do not want this rematch. So I think what the Republicans are more worried about is that somehow everybody coalesces behind someone other than President Trump. There's a different GOP nominee and he decides to be the third party candidate. I mean, there are real concerns and kind of consternations about that because, you heard him a week or two ago with Hugh Hewitt said that he wouldn't pledge that he would support whoever the GOP nominee is if it's not him.
Yeah. And that's got to be something that Ron DeSantis or whoever it is, probably has to worry about in the back of their mind. We keep saying Ron DeSantis because he's, sort of been anointed by people in our industry and whatever is the guy. But I mean, look, in 2016, Jeb Bush led the polls at one point. Ben Carson led the polls. In 2012, a half a dozen people led the polls. Rick Santorum at one point led the polls.
Scott Walker.
Yeah. So it's very, very early.
It is. And you don't want to peak too soon. I mean, DeSantis just got reelected overwhelmingly in Florida. He's got a lot of love there. And I think he knows for him to win this race and immediately pivot to the presidency, listen, everybody expects or thinks that it will probably happen, but he's aware of the optics of that. Also, let some of these other people get in and burn some of their capital. He does not feel in any way, according to folks close to him, the pressure to get in anytime soon. Let some other people get in there, mix it up, see how Trump does. We're also waiting for the former president on a number of legal fronts as well. We're going to get this special grand jury release from Georgia after allegations that he or his allies tried to tamper with election results there in 2020. I mean, there are some other, DOJ investigation. There are some serious legal issues that may face the former president. So I think DeSantis is among those saying, let's hang back. Let's see what happens. Let's see who else gets in. I think he knows when he gets in, it will make all of the headlines and he doesn't feel like he needs to rush.
Moving on to social media and talking Congress about that, Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley says, hey, maybe it's time to set a legal age for social media, 16 years old, to protect kids' mental health. There are studies saying it's not good for them. At this point, it's something that kids have just grown up with, kids who are 16, 15, whatever. I guess the case would have to be to come at it like a public health concern.
Yeah. And the thing is, he said, parents need our help. And I've talked to, parents with teenagers and kids who are on this stuff all day, every day. And they're like, it would be kind of nice for us to be able to point to the law and say, like, sorry, it's illegal for you to have TikTok or it's illegal for you to have Twitter. And so, I just can't let you do it. And I think the onus would be put on the companies to somehow have some kind of screening it would be on them to make sure they didn't have people under 16 on their platforms. Now, advertisers love having those kids there. They know how addicted people get. And I don't know that the social media companies are going to be excited or say like, yeah, the biggest part of our segment of customers, we're going to kick them off these apps. I think it's going to be really hard to get them to go along with it. And they have very strong lobbyists and a lot of pull in Washington. So I don't know if it goes anywhere, but their parents are out there say like, yeah, I'd love to point the finger at someone else as the reason my kids can't have these apps.
Yeah, if that actually gets traction in Congress, it will obviously be a knockdown, drag out or knockdown, drag out fight from the social media companies. Yeah, against that. East Palestine, Ohio, a lot of mistrust there about this train derailment and the chemical spill and the chemical burn-off a couple weeks ago. If it's so safe, they say, why do so many of us feel like crap, coughs and rashes and headaches? I'm not sure what's next here.
I know. I think, gosh, this kind of for a lot of people who weren't local went under the radar for a few days where the locals have been screaming and saying, our animals are dying, our pets are dying. We don't feel good. This thing was heard and seen and smelled miles and miles away. They've been trying to raise the red flag. And so now that we're many, many days into this and people feeling like they weren't getting the full information and this is not being fully and seriously taken, it's only going to get worse because not meaning the physical, I don't understand. I have no idea how that's going to play out. It doesn't look great, but questions about why there wasn't faster action, why there wasn't more transparency, why there weren't more federal assets on the ground, what happened with the train, why were these decisions made?
Now, look, the EPA and state officials are saying we've measured everything. We've measured the air. We've measured the municipal water, and it's fine. Nevertheless, people are reporting these symptoms. So I just don't know what else you can tell people other than, look, maybe unless you're testing for the wrong thing or you don't trust the test themselves. And some people are saying, look, I want to move out of here. I'm afraid of living in Chernobyl.
We think about how many things have happened that until they got beyond a crisis point, like the Flint water situation and others where people feel like they were fighting for answers, fighting for help. And it took a long time until it became a national scandal and people got involved. All the polling shows us that unfortunately people are questioning the integrity of our institutions. They become very skeptical of the government and these federal agencies. And so when they see evidence, they think, in their own backyards, they've got their own kids to worry about, and their own families to worry about. They're very reticent, many of them, to believe that they're getting the full story. So I think that this thing is only going to bubble up into an even bigger scandal about why people didn't have more information, have it, more quickly, more transparently. And we may not know exactly how bad this thing is until we're 5-10 years down the road.
Yeah. And maybe in the shorter term, more talk about infrastructure and more talk about labor rules. Like there was talk that a lot of those people on those crews are fatigued and the trains sped through too fast and that people have been worried about this kind of thing for a long time. Shannon Bream, host of Fox News Sunday. As always, thank you.
Have a great weekend.
And now, some good news with Tanya J. Powers.
Make kindness the norm. That's the theme today for this year's Random Acts of Kindness Day. It was started in 1995 in Denver, Colorado by the nonprofit Random Acts of Kindness Foundation. Being kind isn't just a nice thing to do, it's also good for our physical and mental health. Studies have shown that performing acts of generosity lower blood pressure, among other benefits. Small acts like holding the door for a stranger, petting an animal, or bringing coffee to a colleague can have an effect as well. Researchers say even witnessing acts of kindness has been shown to increase well-being. Tanya J. Powers, Fox News.
Listen to the all-new Bret Baier podcast featuring Common Ground, in-depth talks with lawmakers from opposite sides of the aisle, along with all your Bret Baier favorites like his all-star panel and much more. Available now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary. Tammy Bruce. What's on your mind?
Some Democrats want to give federal workers an 8.7% pay raise. Make no mistake, we want everyone to do well. But it appears we have a government that is picking those who will suffer under the Democrats' historic inflation and those who will not. Federal workers received a 4.6% raise from President Biden in 2023. If passed, this legislation would provide the additional raise in 2024. That's awfully nice of them, considering Democratic policy caused the inflation that has crushed real wages of ordinary Americans. But for Democrats, the only people that matter are the people in the government bureaucracy. The latest confession of not giving a damn about ordinary Americans arrives courtesy of Representative Jerry Connolly, the Democrat of Virginia, and Senator Brian Schatz, the Democrat out of Hawaii, and their federal adjustment of income rates legislation allowing the 8.7 pay raise for 2 million federal workers. Americans who are not part of the permanent bureaucracy will have to continue to suffer under the worst inflation in 40 years. To single out federal workers for relief as everyone else suffers confirms the growing American unease that the federal government has lost touch with everything that matters. But don't fret. We are told there are special reasons why this pay raise is needed for federal workers. According to Connolly, quote, "For years now, federal employees have risked their health and safety working on the front lines of this pandemic. They were subjected to the Trump administration's cruel personal attacks, unsafe work environments, pay freezes, government shutdowns, sequestration cuts, furloughs, and mindless across-the-board hiring freezes," reported Fox News. Oh, so it's to soothe the emotional injuries caused by Trump. Well, okie dokie then. With that, Connolly's rant confirms that what the Democrats are doing to the country has always been about revenge for Trump. Not only do they continue to persecute him, they are punishing Americans writ large for daring to think for ourselves and rejecting the swamp in 2016. Also raising eyebrows is the claim that the raise is required because federal workers suffered on the, quote, front line during COVID. Perhaps those involved in health care. But the GAO confirms what we already knew. All federal agencies relied heavily on telework, some compromising as much as 80% of total work time. We all remember those on the front lines of COVID, the cashiers and workers at supermarkets, those working at pharmacies, first responders, firefighters, police officers, and EMTs, among so many other ordinary Americans doing their jobs every day, no matter what. But they too suffer because of a self-absorbed, permanent Washington bureaucracy and policies which eat away at our pocketbook, quality of life, and even hope for a decent future for our families. Keep in mind, ordinary Americans have had over $4,000 a year disappear from their buying power as real wages are crushed by Biden's monster inflation. Joe Biden's campaign for the presidency was premised on getting us back to normalcy. For them, it appears normal is destroying the economy, facilitating an explosion of crime, a dissolved southern border, and a bumbling foreign policy leading us into more chaos and war. We have a choice about whether or not we accept this warped and cancerous normal, or if we will once again reject their incompetence. In 2024, which will be here faster than you think, we will have another chance to kick these vandals to the curb. I'm Tammy Bruce. This column can be read in its entirety at amac.us, and my show at Fox Nation is called Get Tammy Bruce.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. And now, stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. Listen ad-free on Fox News Podcasts Plus on Apple Podcasts. And Prime members can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa. Just say,
Alexa, play news from Fox.
In Fox News.
It's the latest when you need it, on demand from Fox News and Amazon Alexa.